A wealthy company executive ridiculed a small-town auto repair specialist while her entire staff watched. However, when he solved what her top technical experts couldn't manage, the atmosphere became completely still. "Repair this motor and I'll become your wife," she declared. The conference room fell into a momentary quiet. The silence wasn't caused by her actual statement, but rather by the identity of the speaker. Vanessa Aldridge, the razor-sharp chief executive of Helix Dynamics, among the nation's most rapidly expanding technology companies, had never displayed any tendency toward modesty. She reclined in her executive chair positioned at the conference table's head, her tone saturated with mockery as she launched the comment across the meeting space like a projectile. Across the polished hardwood surface stood Deshaun Tillman, oil stains still visible on his palms, wearing an ordinary charcoal shirt tucked into faded denim, work boots leaving traces of grime on the pristine flooring. His presence there was unexpected. This environment belonged to custom-tailored clothing, crisp dress shirts, and elite technical specialists who had dedicated years in academic settings mastering theoretical concepts. Deshaun worked as an automotive technician from Kansas City, invited in what most attendees presumed was a desperate final attempt. The mockery that ensued from Vanessa's comment wasn't boisterous, yet it cut deep enough to wound. Several technical staff members sneered. Someone whispered quietly, "Best wishes with that endeavor." Another person leaned backward in their seat, folding their arms, staring at Deshaun as though expecting his immediate collapse. Yet he remained steadfast. Deshaun moved closer, composed yet not submissive, his resonant voice unwavering. "Madam, I didn't arrive here for entertainment. I came because someone informed me you faced a challenge that nobody else could resolve." His delivery altered something within the space. For the initial time, several junior technical staff lifted their attention from their writing pads. Vanessa angled her head, her lips forming a contemptuous smile, challenging him. "Are you suggesting," she spoke deliberately, "that following 4 weeks of my finest engineers laboring continuously day and night, you're simply going to walk in here from a repair shop on the city's south end and solve what they were unable to accomplish?" Deshaun remained unmoved. "That's exactly my intention." The meeting room's transparent barriers provided views of Dallas's center, daylight streaming through at an angle that appeared almost dramatic, illuminating the strain. Behind Deshaun sat the experimental motor positioned on a mobile stand, cables and components visible. This represented Helix Dynamics' supposed masterpiece of next-generation innovation. It was designed to revolutionize the industry. More effective, more robust, the type of engineering that could propel the organization into historical significance. Yet it remained non-functional. Not even once. Each attempt to activate it resulted in stalling, irregular operation, or complete failure. Vanessa's voice pierced the quiet once more. "Very well then, Mr. Tillman, demonstrate your abilities." Her words carried the inflection people employ when they are certain they already understand the outcome. Throughout the room, technical staff relaxed in their chairs, murmuring, anticipating witnessing a man's public embarrassment. However, Deshaun proceeded directly to the experimental unit, retrieving a compact tool collection from his carried bag, his actions purposeful and calculated. One senior technical specialist, a lanky individual wearing thin-framed eyeglasses, spoke just audibly enough for others to hear. "This situation is absurd. He lacks knowledge of the technical specifications." Rather than responding defensively, Deshaun glanced up at him and stated, "Engines communicate using universal language, sir. Some simply speak in ways you haven't yet learned to comprehend." This observation caused the room to hesitate. His statements carried significance, not pride. For the initial time, Vanessa experienced something she hadn't anticipated. Interest. Yet interest has a tendency to transform into something different when self-respect becomes involved. Vanessa Aldridge hadn't begun her career at the pinnacle. People enjoy assuming she had, yet that wasn't accurate. She was raised in Mesa, Arizona, as the child of a secondary school mathematics instructor and a mother employed during overnight hospital shifts. Financial resources were consistently limited. She lacked the privilege of dance lessons or recreational weekend excursions. Her environment consisted of artificial lighting in kitchens, overdue payments, and the sound of her mother's aging vehicle struggling each morning to start. What distinguished her wasn't advantage. It was an ambition. Vanessa possessed an internal drive that prevented peaceful rest. She forced her way into Arizona State University, pursued engineering studies while managing dual employment, and quickly discovered that achieving success required being more astute, quicker, and more resilient than everyone surrounding her. And she succeeded. Her initial professional period at Lockwood Tech in Phoenix demonstrated this. She represented the woman who remained composed in boardrooms filled with men double her age. When her designs faced dismissal, she worked until early morning hours perfecting them, only to present again the following morning without hesitation. Career advancement came rapidly. Respect developed more slowly, but she compelled it. By her mid-30s, she wasn't merely ascending the corporate hierarchy. She was removing opportunities so others couldn't utilize them. When the opportunity to lead Helix Dynamics arose, she didn't hesitate. The organization possessed ambitious goals. Sustainable energy motors, effective power systems, and they required someone relentless. Vanessa matched that requirement perfectly. Yet success sharpened her harsh qualities. By age 42, she had established a reputation that accompanied her everywhere. Investors valued her because she produced results. Competitors resented her because she didn't yield. Employees feared her because she delivered words that penetrated deeper than she recognized. To Vanessa, it wasn't malice. It was productive. She lacked time for emotional consideration. You either succeeded or moved aside. This explained her dismissive attitude when the suggestion of consulting a mechanic was initially proposed. Helix technical staff possessed superior education, superior training, superior intellects. If they couldn't repair the experimental unit, what opportunity did someone from a Kansas City garage possess? When her administrative assistant informed her about Deshaun Tillman, she nearly laughed aloud. Nevertheless, something regarding her pride wouldn't allow simple refusal. She viewed the entire circumstance as an opportunity to strengthen her authority. If she permitted the mechanic entry, allowing his failure before her engineers, it would only emphasize her position. Not everyone deserved a place at her table. This explained why she delivered the mocking statement with such ease. To Vanessa, it represented performance, a demonstration of power, a reminder of her control. Still, as she reclined in her chair during that meeting, observing Deshaun unpack his equipment, a memory surfaced. Her father, years previously, bent over their family station wagon's hood. He had grease on his hands, determination in his expression, and a method of explaining the smallest details as though they were magical. She recalled standing on her toes to observe what he indicated, nodding as if she comprehended even when she didn't. She suppressed that memory as quickly as it appeared. Nostalgia didn't suit her. What mattered presently was the display. She wanted his failure, not due to personal concern, but because his failure would strengthen the empire she had constructed, one that demanded respect and revered intelligence. However, sometimes the very platform you construct for someone's downfall becomes the platform for your own education. And while Vanessa believed she was about to prove her point, she had no awareness her own narrative was about to be rewritten before everyone. If Vanessa Aldridge's existence was characterized by conference rooms and time constraints, Deshaun Tillman's existence was characterized by the garage located at Prospect Avenue's corner in Kansas City, Missouri. The Tillman family business wasn't elaborate. The paint on their sign had deteriorated years ago. The parking area was damaged, and the customer area contained 2 chairs that squeaked when occupied. However, for 3 generations, that modest shop had maintained vehicles and families in operation. Deshaun was raised there. His earliest recollections weren't of playthings or animated shows. They consisted of socket wrenches, motor oil's aroma, and his grandfather humming classic blues melodies while securing bolts. By 10 years old, he could replace a tire more quickly than some adults. By 16, he could reconstruct an engine block from the beginning. School wasn't his environment. He wasn't failing, but he wasn't pursuing grades like awards, either. His classroom was the garage, and his education consisted of patience, accuracy, and pride in quality work. Teachers suggested he should aspire higher, but Deshaun never perceived anything insignificant about maintaining someone's vehicle operation when they lacked funds for replacement. Following high school, he remained in Kansas City, working full-time at the shop alongside his father. Life wasn't simple. Bills accumulated, customers sometimes delayed payment, and there were weeks when Deshaun had to choose between new equipment or food. Yet quitting wasn't in his nature. He continued appearing, continued operating tools, and continued solving problems that others abandoned. And that represented his character. He didn't surrender. It wasn't solely about automobiles. Neighbors approached him when their lawn equipment broke down, when their children's motorcycles wouldn't start, when a generator failed during storms. Deshaun possessed a talent for listening, not just to machinery, but to people. He didn't laugh when someone attempted to describe a sound with "it goes clunk clunk." He didn't dismiss them when they insisted something was wrong, even if he couldn't detect it immediately. He paid attention. That patience built confidence. That confidence caught the attention of a Helix Dynamics junior engineer visiting relatives in Kansas City. His cousin experienced car problems and Deshaun resolved it in under an hour. A problem that confused 3 different shops previously. That engineer recognized something in Deshaun's approach, the way he diagnosed without panic, without excessive complication, just listening, testing, adjusting. He informed his supervisor about this mechanic who thinks like an engineer but works with his hands like an artist. Deshaun didn't anticipate a call. When Helix's assistant contacted him, asking if he'd be willing to examine their experimental engine, his initial response was disbelief. Why would a technology giant care about a guy with grease under his fingernails and no diploma on the wall? However, the voice on the phone sounded serious, almost desperate. Against his instincts, he agreed. The journey to Dallas wasn't glamorous. He drove overnight in his pickup truck, toolbox rattling in the back, resting at stops to conserve money. By the time he arrived at Helix headquarters, his shirt was wrinkled, his boots were dusty, but his mind was alert. Walking into that sleek skyscraper with glass doors that opened silently and marble floors polished like mirrors, Deshaun felt the weight of the difference between his world and theirs. He knew people were staring at his clothing, at his hands, at the way he didn't fit the pattern, but he didn't shrink. He had repaired machines older, dirtier, and more complicated than most of these engineers had probably ever encountered. And that was the quiet truth about Deshaun Tillman. He wasn't attempting to impress anyone. He wasn't seeking validation or applause. He was there because someone requested help. And helping was his specialty. Still, when he entered that boardroom and heard the laughter at Vanessa's wager, he felt the sting. Not because he doubted himself, but because he'd witnessed that same laughter before. Teachers who didn't think he'd succeed. Customers who questioned his ability until they saw the engine roar to life. People who thought a degree made them more intelligent than experience. This wasn't new. It was just another test. And tests didn't frighten Deshaun. They focused on him. The experimental unit sat in the room's center, appearing more like a disassembled puzzle than a breakthrough awaiting realization. Wires hung like loose threads, bolts scattered on the rolling table, and a faint burn mark stretched across one panel from a failed test. Vanessa Aldridge stood with her arms crossed, her tone sharp. "Mr. Tillman, I'll be direct. You're here because my assistant insists you have some unique method. But let's clarify one thing. This engine represents 4 years of development, hundreds of millions of dollars, the brightest minds in this field, and none of them could make it function. So, excuse me if I don't place my confidence in a guy who changes spark plugs for a living." A few engineers chuckled quietly. Deshaun didn't look up from the engine. He ran his fingers along the wiring, tilting his head slightly as if the machine were whispering something only he could hear. His composure was almost unsettling in a room so filled with tension. "Changing spark plugs covers the expenses," he said, finally glancing at her. "But don't confuse simple work for simple thinking. Machines don't care about credentials. They care about respect." The boardroom went quiet again. One of the younger engineers, a woman seated near the back, leaned forward, curious. Vanessa smirked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Respect? That's your secret? I've got PhDs who couldn't fix this, but you're telling me all it takes is respect." Deshaun shrugged, tightening a wire. "Sometimes that's all it takes. Listening, watching, not rushing to prove how smart you are." The senior engineer with wire-rimmed glasses scoffed. "This is absurd. He doesn't even have the schematics. He doesn't know the programming behind the controls." Deshaun didn't look at him. Instead, he asked a question no one expected. "When's the last time anyone actually looked at the wiring harness instead of running simulations?" Silence. Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "What are you implying?" "I'm implying," Deshaun said evenly, "that sometimes problems aren't complicated. Sometimes they're staring you right in the face, but you're too busy proving your theories to notice." A ripple of discomfort moved through the engineers. Vanessa's jaw tightened, though her smirk stayed. That was when she threw the line loud enough for everyone to hear. "Fine, then. If you can fix this engine right here, right now, I'll marry you." Gasps, a burst of muffled laughter. A few of the engineers glanced at each other, unsure if she was serious. Her voice carried that mocking edge that dared anyone to challenge her. Deshaun straightened slowly, meeting her gaze. "Careful what you promise. Words have a way of circling back." The boardroom went still. No one expected him to respond with that kind of steady confidence. Vanessa tilted her head, still holding the room in her grip. "All right, then. Go on. Impress us." Deshaun took a breath, then knelt beside the prototype. He pulled a wrench from his toolkit, movements deliberate, precise. The woman in the back whispered to the colleague beside her, "He's not even hesitating." The older engineer muttered, "He's bluffing. He's going to embarrass himself." But as Deshawn adjusted a loose connector, tightened a bracket, and rerouted one of the wires, his focus was unshakable. He didn't look up at the whispers, didn't flinch at the laughter. He treated the machine the way he treated every broken-down car in his family shop, like it was worth his full attention. And for the first time, a sliver of doubt crossed Vanessa's face. But doubt is dangerous when you've built your entire reputation on certainty. Every eye in the room followed Deshawn as he crouched by the prototype. The air conditioner hummed above, but it felt like silence had swallowed the space. Deshawn pulled a flashlight from his bag, angled the beam across the wiring, and muttered softly to himself. "Too tight. That's fighting against the current." The senior engineer leaned forward, whispering harshly, "What is he even doing? He doesn't know the voltage tolerances. He's guessing." Deshawn didn't look up. Not guessing. Watching. He loosened a clamp, adjusted the wiring bundle, then tapped the side of the housing with the back of his wrench. The sound it made was duller than it should have been. His eyes narrowed. Vanessa leaned back, arms folded, her tone mocking. "So what now, Mr. Tillman? Going to knock on it until it starts talking?" Without missing a beat, Deshawn replied, "Machines always talk. The question is whether you're listening." That answer drew silence. Even the younger engineers who had been skeptical now leaned forward, watching more closely. He unscrewed a panel, exposing the intake manifold. Running his fingers across the grooves, he found a small crack barely visible under the light. He pointed to it. "Here's part of your problem. A fracture this small throws off the pressure, making the system choke before it can stabilize." One of the engineers stood, peering closer. "How did we miss that?" Deshawn glanced at him. "Because you were looking for something complex. Sometimes the big issues hide behind small mistakes." The words landed heavier than he realized. Moving with quiet focus, he swapped out the fractured component with a spare part sitting in the kit Helix engineers had abandoned after their last failed attempt. Then he adjusted the harness again, clipping the wires in a cleaner route. His hands were steady, not rushing, but not wasting a single second. Vanessa tapped her pen against the table. "Even if you're right about that crack, it doesn't explain why the software kept stalling the sequence." Deshawn finally stood, wiping his hands on a rag. "Because the system was getting signals it couldn't interpret. The wiring's misaligned with the sensor feed. Whoever installed this routed it against the housing, throwing off the timing. The computer doesn't know what it's hearing." The room fell silent again. He stepped back, signaling to the engineers. "Power it up." The senior engineer scoffed. "It won't matter. We've tried this 100 times." Deshawn met his eyes, calm as ever. "Then one more won't hurt." Vanessa raised a brow, half smiling, as if she was already preparing her cutting remark for when it failed. "All right. Start it." One of the younger engineers pressed the control pad. For a moment, the room filled with the same sputter they had heard dozens of times before. A cough, a stall, a whine. Vanessa smirked, ready to speak. But then the sound deepened. The engine steadied. A low, consistent rhythm filled the boardroom as the prototype came to life, smooth and strong. The younger engineer's eyes widened. "It's running. It's actually running." Gasps spread around the room. Engineers who had spent weeks failing to get the system stable now stared at the machine as if it were impossible. Vanessa's smirk vanished. Her pen froze mid-tap. Deshawn stood with his arms crossed, watching calmly. All it needed was someone to listen. The engine purred on, steady and alive, mocking every doubt that had filled the room before. Engineers moved closer, checking the readings, confirming the stability. One of them turned back to Vanessa, shaking his head in disbelief. "He fixed it completely." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Deshawn broke the silence, his voice level. "I told you degrees don't fix engines. Respect does." Vanessa's eyes locked on him, her confidence shaken for the first time in years. She had built her empire on control, on being the smartest person in the room. But here, in front of her entire team, the man she mocked had done what her best couldn't. And sometimes the silence after a victory speaks louder than the victory itself. For a few seconds, no one moved. The engine's steady rhythm filled the space, each pulse reminding everyone that it wasn't a dream. Then the dam broke. Engineers who had once rolled their eyes at Deshawn now crowded around the prototype, checking the diagnostic screen, scanning the readouts, and shaking their heads in disbelief. It's holding steady. Voltage is balanced. This shouldn't be possible, the senior engineer with the wire-rimmed glasses muttered under his breath. Weeks of simulations, and he spots it in minutes. His tone carried more than disbelief. It carried shame. Deshawn didn't gloat. He didn't grin. Didn't rub it in. He stood back, arms crossed, his expression calm, almost detached. For him, this wasn't about humiliating anyone. It was about doing the work right. But for Vanessa, it was different. Her eyes stayed fixed on the engine, her mind racing. Every part of her wanted to reclaim control, to remind the room who was in charge, but she couldn't. Not when the proof was vibrating in front of her, undeniable and alive. One of the younger engineers turned to Deshawn. How did you see it so quickly? He looked at her with a hint of a smile. Machines don't lie. People do. People make things complicated, but a machine? It tells you the truth if you're patient enough to listen. His words landed hard. Several engineers exchanged glances as if hearing a lesson they should have learned years ago. Vanessa finally spoke, her voice quieter than before. You make it sound so simple. Deshawn looked straight at her. Simple doesn't mean easy. That's where most people get it wrong. The room went quiet again. For the first time, Vanessa felt her authority slipping. Not because anyone disrespected her, but because respect was being redirected toward a man she had written off before he even touched the machine. Her stomach tightened. She hated the feeling. But deep down, something else stirred. A memory of all the times she had been dismissed, underestimated, laughed at. The hunger that had driven her to prove everyone wrong. Now she was on the other side of that. The irony wasn't lost on her. The senior engineer cleared his throat, trying to shift the focus back. Well, clearly this is valuable input. Perhaps Mr. Tillman could consult with us moving forward. But the words sounded hollow. Everyone in the room knew this wasn't just valuable input. It was a revelation. Deshawn nodded once, not pressing the moment. I'll help where I can, but let's get one thing clear. This wasn't luck. It was paying attention. You'd be surprised how much you can solve when you put pride aside long enough to listen. A few heads lowered. Engineers scribbled notes as if trying to capture wisdom they couldn't find in textbooks. Vanessa's throat felt dry. She wanted to snap back, to remind everyone she was still the CEO, still the one signing checks, still the reason they even had jobs. But the words caught in her mouth because deep down she knew what had just happened wasn't about hierarchy. It was about truth. And truth is hard to fight when it stares you in the face. But truths have a way of demanding more than acknowledgement. They demand change. When the meeting finally adjourned, the boardroom didn't empty the way it normally did. Engineers lingered, still huddled around the prototype, whispering to one another, replaying every detail of what had just happened. For once, they weren't dissecting charts or arguing equations. They were replaying the quiet way Deshawn Tillman had shifted their world in less than an hour. Vanessa stayed seated at the head of the table, her pen lying forgotten on the polished wood. Her mind, normally sharp and unyielding, felt strangely heavy. She replayed her own words, the mocking tone, the bet she had thrown like a dagger, the laughter that followed, and then the silence when Deshawn proved her wrong. She glanced at him as he packed his tools. No prideful grin, no arrogance, just steady hands putting everything back where it belonged. The kind of man who didn't need to say, "I told you so." The work spoke for him. Finally, she broke the silence. "Mr. Tillman." He looked up, calm as ever. "Yes, Her voice faltered for the first time all day. "I underestimated you." Deshawn tilted his head slightly, then gave a half-smile. "You're not the first." That answer stung more than if he had scolded her. She realized how many times people like him had probably been dismissed, mocked, written off. Not because they lacked skill, but because people like her never looked past the surface. She leaned back, exhaling slowly. "What did you do today? You embarrassed me." A couple of the engineers froze, uncertain if her words were the start of another verbal lash, but she continued, her tone softer. "Not because you made me look small, but because you reminded me how small I was acting." The room went silent again. Engineers glanced at one another, surprised by the honesty in her voice. Deshawn studied her for a moment, then nodded. Sometimes the hardest engines to fix aren't the ones on the table. The words landed deeper than she expected. Vanessa didn't apologize in front of everyone. Not yet. But at that moment, something shifted. The sharpness she wore like armor cracked just enough for humility to slip through. As Deshawn left the boardroom, toolbox in hand, the younger engineer who had been watching so closely called after him. "Mr. Tillman, thank you." He turned, nodded once, and walked out, leaving behind more than a running engine. He left a lesson none of them would forget. Vanessa stayed behind long after the others filed out. She stared at the engine, the steady vibration echoing through the floor. It wasn't just running. It was teaching. Teaching her that titles, money, degrees, none of it mattered if you stopped listening. Later, when the board discussed how to move forward, Vanessa surprised them all. She didn't start with projections or investor updates. She started with a sentence no one expected. "Sometimes the answers we need don't come from the top. They come from the places we're too proud to look at." The room shifted. Some engineers nodded, some sat stunned, but everyone felt the difference. And that's the real story here. It wasn't about a mechanic fixing an engine. It was about pride meeting humility. About respect proving stronger than arrogance. About remembering that greatness doesn't always wear a suit or carry a degree. Deshaun Tillman walked into that boardroom as the man no one believed in. He walked out as the man who reminded them all that respect and patience are the tools that fix more than machines. They fix people, too. So, here's the lesson. Never mock someone's work just because it looks different from your own. The person you dismiss might be the one who saves you when your world is falling apart. If this story made you pause, think about the people around you, the ones you might overlook, the ones you might underestimate. Show them respect. Listen to them. And if this message hits home for you, share it with someone who needs to hear it.